lament. The dead linger.
Ink does not scream, but it records the screams that will follow. In the echoing depths of Administratum Complex Sigma 7, beneath 17 levels of reinforced rockcrete and the accumulated weight of 10 millennia of imperial record-keeping, scribe adept Matthias Korin performs the daily ritual of planetary assessment. His fingers bear the permanent stains of his profession: black ink ground beneath the nails, red correction fluid across the knuckles, the yellow tinge of parchment dust embedded in fingerprint whorls. The ledgers never end. Assessment form. Gamma Prime 7741 spreads before him like a cartography of hunger rendered in columns and figures. Each entry represents millions of lives reduced to mathematical abstractions: grain tonnage, population density, industrial capacity, recruitment quotas. His stylus moves with mechanical precision across headers marked expected yield, actual delivery, and variance percentage. The work is eternal. The consequences are absolute. Viridia Prime. Population 4.2 billion. Expected annual grain tithe 847 million tons. Third quarter delivery 201 million tons. Variance minus 76.3%. 3 consecutive quarters of shortfall. Korin's stylus hovers over the assessment column, and he reaches for the red ink. The mark appears beside Viridia Prime's designation like a cauterized wound on parchment. This is not malice, but protocol, adherence to the compliance gradient system every clerk learns by catechism. Minor deviation, systematic deficiency, active resistance, treasonous rebellion. Each stage links to forms, seals, and couriers. Each tier primes the next. Red indicates systematic deficiency, triggering immediate departmental review under remedial escalation protocols. Rebellion, when it comes, is usually mathematics exceeding biology. A world can cut rations only so far before muscles fail in the mines and terraces. A tithe can rise by edict faster than infants can grow into laborers. The imperial system operates on perpetual increase. Each world must produce more than the previous year, regardless of crop blight, industrial contamination, or resource depletion. Viridia Prime produces less grain because the Imperium demands more ore. The contradiction is structural, not moral. Korin completes his notation without conscious thought. Recommend Departamento Assessment. The phrase carries weight beyond its administrative meaning. Somewhere, a data slate will illuminate in an Arbite's precinct. Somewhere, a prefect will draft audit notices. Somewhere, a Vox channel will clear for priority transport. Administrative review, investigative audit, corrective intervention, punitive action. Behind these bland nouns stand troop schedules and supply chains, the smell of propellant and ash. This scene repeats simultaneously across thousands of worlds under different skies. 10,000 scribes in identical chambers apply identical criteria to impossible situations. The machine eats complexity by reducing it to columns. When ledgers cannot balance, the system amputates. Mercy introduces variance. Variance erodes predictability. Unpredictability kills worlds. Korin sets down his stylus and reaches for the next assessment. The work continues. In Viridia's fields, someone will taste the absence already cataloged here. The red mark is only the first cut, the polite one. Worse is coming. What specific mechanisms trigger remedial escalation protocols? How do worlds typically respond when imperial mathematics exceeds physical reality? Numbers are the Imperium's preferred theology. Quotas are its catechism. The red mark beside Viridia Prime's designation, logged by scribe adept Korin, triggers calculations that stretch across the galaxy like a web of mathematical inevitability. In Assessment Chamber Tertius, Sub-Prefect Valdris Caney addresses subordinate analysts with the measured cadence of a litanist, his augmetic larynx lending each syllable metallic weight. Behind him, Hololithic displays render the sector as geometric abstractions. Population pyramids, resource extraction curves, compliance probability matrices. Each world pulses with statistical indicators. 17 pulse red. Tithe assessment methodology operates on principles that would impress a tech priest with their ruthless elegance. Base population aggregates minus the non-productive. Infants, the infirm, sanctioned psychers, multiplied by productivity coefficients derived from soil fertility, machine density, and transit efficiency. The critical element: assessments calculate not current capacity but projected maximum output, assuming optimal conditions, perfect weather, and populations working at biological limits. Environmental shifts, plague outbreaks, and equipment failures become statistical noise, not mitigating factors. Quota reduction requires verification across 5 imperial offices: Administratum, Munitorum, Adeptus Arbits, Mechanicus, and Ecclesiarchy. Each demands independent corroboration through Byzantine procedural requirements. Transit manifests must match shrine-verified blessing counts. Crop assays must align with Mechanicus augur logs. Mortality figures require Arbite's coroner seals. Any discrepancy converts petition to audit, audit to suspicion. The safest career path remains denial, the most perilous, advocating for leniency. Observe the mathematics of mercy, Caney explains, gesturing toward historical data from the Corrales precedent. A world granted quota reduction during plague outbreak. Reduced tithe approved on humanitarian grounds. Result: 17 neighboring systems submitted similar requests within 2 standard years. Sector productivity declined by 23%. Precedent created expectation. Expectation enabled rebellion. The Sector Stability Index quantifies this inevitability. 9.4% of worlds statistically expected to fail compliance annually without threatening overall throughput. This figure appears in budget allocations as acceptable operational loss, factored into resource distribution like spoilage in supply convoys. Failure is priced into the system's architecture. Alongside compliance projections sit pacification reserve allocations, discrete budget lines funding emergency transport capacity, audit teams, and what ledgers euphemistically term post-assessment resource optimization. These reserves scale according to stability index calculations, encompassing more than military intervention, complete governmental restructuring, economic rehabilitation, and population management protocols designed for post-compliance implementation. Economic rebellion emerges when imperial mathematics exceed biological possibility. Communities compensate through substitutes, diluted rations, extended shifts, then through manifest adjustments, hidden stockpiles, bribed auditors, finally through sabotaged weighbridges and rerouted freight. Each workaround degrades reported output further, tightening the statistical noose. What begins as misreporting to prevent starvation accrues into patterns the index interprets as systematic defiance. The machine requires predictable input, Caney concludes, pointer tracing Viridia Prime's declining trajectory. Unpredictability kills more efficiently than any weapon. The display updates. Viridia Prime's mathematical trajectory points toward a single conclusion already budgeted in next cycle's pacification reserve allocations. What are pacification reserve allocations, and when do they deploy? How do planetary governors navigate the gap between imperial demands and physical reality? Governor Thaddeus Corvin receives the Departamento assessment results in his private study, where portraits of past planetary governors watch from gilt frames like judges presiding over his moral disintegration. The astropathic packet arrives sealed in leaded vellum, cogtooth stamp unbroken, the rubrics stark. Administrative review initiated, systematic deficiency confirmed, recommend investigative audit within 2 standard weeks. He dismisses aides, closes the shutters on the command spire, and sets the parchment beside a cracked porcelain ration bowl that belonged to his mother. The numbers do not negotiate. Projected harvest. Grain tier, 612 million tons. Tithe demand, 847 million. Reserve stockpiles after spring blight, 84 million. Population, 4.2 billion at reduced rations for the 6th consecutive quarter. The arithmetic draws a noose around his world. Full compliance means famine by the 3rd month of the new cycle. 847 calories per day, insufficient to sustain manual labor. Non-compliance means imperial retribution. Between starvation and suppression lies no viable path, only the choice of how his people die. For 37 years, Corvin has served the Emperor faithfully, believing imperial governance meant protecting humanity from the galaxy's countless horrors. His loyalty to the master of mankind remains absolute. His faith in the bureaucracy claiming to represent that loyalty crumbles like diseased bone. The Emperor requires strength. The administratum demands weakness through systematic resource extraction that leaves worlds defenseless against the very threats imperial protection supposedly guards against. Officio Prefectus. Monitoring protocols track his every significant decision through Vox intercepts, behavioral analysis matrices, and loyalty assessment algorithms. Political officers embedded within the Planetary Defense Force cross-check caloric issuance against labor output, compare Shrine Blessed manifests to Mechanicus augur logs, and conduct random loyalty interviews along transport corridors. Anomalies above 3.2%. Trigger prefect-level inquiry. 3 consecutive anomalies summon an audit fleet. Emergency governance exemptions theoretically exist for extreme circumstances, but accessing them requires justification through the same bureaucratic channels that created the crisis. The procedural labyrinth typically consumes more time than the catastrophe itself, and Viridia Prime's crisis stems from imperial demand, not natural disaster. To admit the tithe impossible is to admit failure, a cardinal sin in the Imperium. Alone in the pre-dawn hours when surveillance registers lowest activity, Corvin makes his fatal decision. He will implement creative accounting. Moisture content coefficients will be adjusted upward by figures that, multiplied across shipments, conjure 80 million phantom tons. Warehouse lots marked for tithe will circulate through sealed transit loops to inflate counting events. Transport manifests will show grain shipments to orbital freight stations, while cargo actually flows to civilian distribution centers. The PDF will escort night convoys, officially outbound, actually redirected to provincial silos where ration clerks distribute by parish list. He unlocks a steel cabinet, withdraws a ledger that does not officially exist, and writes the decision that will end him. Each falsified document represents another step toward heresy in imperial eyes, another act of mercy in human terms. Grain intended to maintain tithe compliance will keep children alive instead. Corvin signs the first fraudulent manifest with steady hand, the signature identical to authorized exemplars, betraying none of the spiritual anguish behind its formation. In the Emperor's name, he commits treason against the Emperor's servants. What triggers officio prefectus intervention in planetary governance? How does the imperial system detect and respond to creative accounting? The first falsified manifest does not scream either. It merely fails to harmonize. Within 6 weeks, the disharmony accumulates into a pattern multiple imperial systems can detect simultaneously. Moisture coefficients inch upward across Viridia Prime's grower cooperatives without corresponding Mechanicus augur humidity reports. Blessing seals logged by parish scribes fail to match consignments. Entering starport elevators. Astropathic confirmations of outbound freighters arrive with suspicious delays, then arrive in triplicate for hulls that orbital traffic control shows never burned fuel. Under compliance verification protocols, tri-office cross-reference begins automatically. Administratum tally servitors compare surface manifests to orbital weighbridge readings. Mechanicus monitoring stations audit refinery throughput against elevator cycle times. Ecclesiarchy Reviews tithe blessing liturgies, counting litanies recited per recorded ton. 3 independent data streams converge on one mathematical impossibility. Reported grain volume exceeds mechanically possible lift capacity by 11.8% for the quarter. The escalation ladder ticks upward with mechanical precision. Administrative review locks, investigative audit opens, Arbeits attaches, request warehouse keys with polite warrants. Officio Perfectus observers join PDF musters under the pretext of doctrine alignment. Parish ledgers disappear for archival scanning. The astropathic choir forwards continued discrepancies to sector compliance, noting signal lag manipulation. Typical of creative accounting. Each imperial institution reads identical data through its doctrinal lens, yet all reach aligned conclusions. The administratum sees administrative failure, falsified records threatening bureaucratic integrity. The ecclesiarchy perceives spiritual corruption, false witness committed at industrial scale, denying the emperor his rightful due. The munitorum identifies supply chain disruption. Regiments budgeted to consume Viridia's grain now require emergency shipment from elsewhere, at costs measured in cancelled offensives and broken attrition curves. In precinct habs and silo towns, whispered rumors carry dangerous hope. The Harrow precedent. 15 years passed, Harrow Secundus miners seized their astropathic tower, burned tithe barns, and held out through a 3-month siege, until imperial forces negotiated reduced quotas rather than accept continued casualties. The story omits orbital bombardment, sterilized districts, and conscripts in chains. It remembers only that armed resistance forced conversation. Hope spreads through transport corridors and canteen queues, voxed in code and whispered in ration lines. Corrective intervention activates. Key silos seized. Mid-level stevedores arrested. Commissariat presence doubled at starports. Sermons of penance are scheduled. Ration queues filmed for loyalty indexing. Munitorum reserve transport slots reallocate under pacification reserve flags, previously budgeted as statistical inevitability. The convergence creates unstoppable institutional momentum. Administrative incompetence plus spiritual heresy plus operational unreliability equals mathematical certainty. Military intervention. In sealed chambers, conclave protocols align departmental responses. Data harmonizes, signatures exchange. Draft orders for punitive action take shape. Blank spaces awaiting regiment numbers already allocated in distant fleet manifests. Governor Corvin's mercy becomes the catalyst for systematic suppression, not through imperial malice, but through institutional logic that cannot distinguish between salvation and sedition. What is the Harrow precedent, and why does it influence rebel calculations? How do different imperial institutions coordinate responses to planetary noncompliance? Harvest Festival on Viridia Prime had become a liturgy of substitutes. Sackcloth penance replacing silk, bread stretched with sawdust flour, hymns sung softly to spare hungry lungs. In the dust-choked plaza of Port Varkos, Arbeits enforcer Valdek arrived with ledger stamps, a portable altar, and writs of seizure. The emergency grain reserves, 200 tons stockpiled against complete famine, required immediate confiscation pending audit resolution. Imperial law permitted no exceptions for local need. Mira Castellan clutched her daughter's hand while balancing a cloth sack containing the family's weekly allocation, 2 kilograms of processed meal, adequate for survival if supplemented with protein paste. Her daughter Sira wore a festival crown fashioned from requisition forms, the Gothic script reading Imperial Compliance Form 7 Alpha in faded ink. Behind them stretched a queue of families carrying containers ranging from military surplus canisters to repurposed chemical drums. Valdek read from his data slate with mechanical precision. By Compliance Verification Protocol 7, emergency stockpiles require audit pending, administrative discrepancy resolution. The bureaucratic language meant starvation for anyone depending on reserve rations. When he moved to confiscate Mira's grain sack, she stepped forward rather than retreat. "This feeds my daughter for 7 days," she stated with quiet firmness. "Take it, and she starves." Sergeant Jorik Thane of the PDF watched from the warehouse entrance, laser gun at ready position. 14 years defending Viridia against orc raids had taught him clear distinctions between duty and survival. His orders required supporting Imperial seizure operations. His daughter stood in the queue behind Mira Castellan. The contradiction gnawed at training structures built over decades of loyal service. Father Matthias observed with growing theological unease, remembering catechisms about the Emperor's protection of humanity, while witnessing his servants threatening children with hunger. Imperial doctrine taught that the Emperor's will manifested through proper authority, yet this authority demanded actions violating fundamental commandments to preserve human life. In hidden corners, whispered references to the Harrow precedent spread dangerous hope, a world that resisted, negotiated, survived with reduced tithes. Underground networks, originally coordinating harvest schedules and transport logistics, now carried coded messages through repurposed agricultural communicators. Vox operators in mining settlements relayed fragments about successful negotiations and acceptable terms. Courier women crossed the plaza with prayer beads knotted in codes taught in canteen lines, spreading the story that resistance might not mean annihilation. When Valdek reached for his shock maul, Mira wrapped protective arms around her grain sack. Thane's finger found his trigger guard. Father Matthias stepped forward with hands raised in supplication. The enforcer swung. Mira stumbled backward. Sarah screamed. Thane's laser gun discharged reflexively, the beam taking Valdek through the chest, cauterizing uniform fabric and flesh simultaneously. The enforcer collapsed among scattered grain, blood mixing with meal dust on warehouse concrete. Silence followed, broken only by a child's sobbing and the acrid smell of burned flesh. The line between civil disobedience and armed rebellion had evaporated in a moment of desperate necessity. Treason had been committed. The mathematical certainty of imperial response began calculating itself across departmental channels. How does the imperial system typically respond to the killing of enforcement personnel? What role do underground networks play in coordinating multiplanetary resistance? The death of RBT's enforcer Valdek triggers deployment protocols refined across 10 millennia of planetary suppression. Within 18 hours, astropathic channels clear for priority traffic as Sector Command assembles a conclave of representatives. Administratum Compliance, Battlefleet Subsector, Departamento Munitorum, Officio Prefectus, and Ecclesiarchy Liaison. The question is not whether, but how. How to restore predictability at the lowest long-term cost to throughput. Authorization proceeds by rubric, releasing pacification reserve allocations pre-budgeted for events precisely like this. Lord General Mordak receives deployment authorization aboard the battleship Inexorable Judgment, his scarred features illuminated by hololithic tactical displays showing Viridia Prime's population centers and resource deposits. The 47th Cadian Shock Regiment carries a reputation built through comprehensive compliance operations across 17 rebellious worlds. Their efficiency measured not in territory secured, but in resources extracted per casualty sustained. Mordak's service record lists successful pacification ratios with accountant precision. Xerion Revolt suppressed with 94.7% resource retention. Kalos Insurrection concluded with 89.2% infrastructure preservation. Force composition follows established templates. 2 line brigades for frontage and cordon. 1 mechanized brigade for rapid deployment. Artillery group with basilisks to shape population movement. Attached armored company for intimidation. Commissariat companies embedded at company level. Rules of engagement specify tightened tolerances, curfew enforcement, safe conduct corridors only after census completion, heavy. Ordnance authorization for districts refusing headcount compliance within 24 hours. Deployment logistics reveal the industrial scale of planetary subjugation. Munitorum cargo haulers carry not just troops and ammunition, but post-conflict infrastructure, portable administratum complexes, mobile tithe assessment stations, temporary labor processing centers, and resource extraction equipment. The 47th travels with its own bureaucratic apparatus, scribes, assessors, and compliance officers trained to transform military victory into economic opportunity within standard weeks. Population optimization protocols appear in sealed annexes, calculating acceptable casualty ratios based on demographic utility. Children below working age represent future labor assets. Adults in prime productivity years require preservation when possible. Elderly populations constitute acceptable losses during operations. The mathematics reduce human lives to economic variables while maintaining clinical language that distances planners from consequences. Asset recovery procedures encompass systematic cataloging of planetary resources during military operations. Mechanicus attaches accompany assault companies to assess industrial capacity. Administratum observers monitor warehouse seizures. Ecclesiarchy representatives evaluate shrine wealth for redistribution. Success becomes measured through recovered assets rather than enemy casualties. A world stripped of resources represents greater victory than one merely conquered. The force disparity is absolute. Against Viridia's beleaguered PDF and desperate civilian militias, the Imperium deploys sector-scale war fleet, multi-regimental invasion force, and full logistical might. Resistance will be crushed not through heroic effort, but by relentless tonnage. Yet, sealed compartments aboard inexorable judgment contain equipment reserved for extreme circumstances: virus bomb canisters, cyclonic torpedo warheads, exterminatus, authorization codes. These measures represent ultimate imperial response when resource extraction becomes impossible. Complete planetary sterilization to prevent rebellion's spread. What are population optimization protocols, and how are acceptable casualty ratios determined? What extreme measures beyond conventional warfare does the Imperium maintain in reserve? The 72 hours of Viridia Prime's suppression begin with silence. At hour 0, battle fleet interdiction vessels cut the planet's astropathic choir and spike communications arrays with precision lance strikes. Orbital relays power down under servitor supervision. Merchant hulls are herded to holding orbits and boarded. The planet becomes isolated, its population unaware that similar operations suppress 47 rebellions annually across the Imperium. Nothing leaves, nothing speaks. The mathematical certainty of imperial response transforms into kinetic reality. Hour 18 brings precision bombardment according to target. Priority matrices. Macro cannons remove PDF command bunkers with surgical strikes, leaving fused craters where resistance infrastructure once stood. The astropathic tower seized by insurgents invoking the Harrow precedent collapses in a plume of dust and false hope. Targeting algorithms spare grain elevators and rail junctions where possible. Infrastructure preserved equals value retained. Each impact registers on departmento assessment matrices as acceptable collateral damage within resource optimization parameters. At hour 24, mass deployment commences. Sergeant Havel of the 47th Cadian advances through Habro 12. His data slate displaying population optimization protocol parameters, secure children for productivity assessment, detain military-age adults for processing, preserve workers tagged as high value, minimize machinery damage. His boots track ash and promethium residue as he directs families toward safe conduct corridors, counts heads, notes absent males of conscription age. The orders reduce human complexity to mathematical variables. Violence arrives as scheduled procedure. In District Low Kelvin, former PDF Sergeant Jorik Thane crouches among warehouse ruins, watching his district burn in geometric patterns. The underground networks that once coordinated harvest schedules now serve Imperial targeting matrices. Every Vox frequency, every courier route, every safe house location appears on Cadian reconnaissance displays. Prayer beads knotted in agricultural cipher match patterns seized from captured catechists. The network has become a map. The map has become a target set. The Harrow precedent proves false. No negotiation occurs when Imperial logistics operate at full capacity. Hour 36. Governor Corvin transmits his final message as Melta charges burn through command bunker doors. His voice carries no defiance, only mathematical acknowledgement. The Emperor protects, but his servants consume. I chose my people over my oaths. The transmission cuts as shock troops breach the sanctum. His creative accounting records, preserved in sealed data cores, will serve as tribunal evidence. The signatures match. The fraud is documented. The legal framework for enhanced punishment is established. Aboard the inexorable judgment, Departamento Observer Lix calculates resource recovery ratios in real time. Infrastructure damage, 23.7% within acceptable parameters. Population retention, 68.8%. Concentrated losses among non-productive demographics per optimization protocols. Industrial capacity, 91.4% operational after repair projections. Each data point shapes tomorrow's extraction schedules, each casualty figure balanced against throughput preservation. The rebellion transforms from political failure into economic opportunity. Hour 52. Witnesses systematic resistance collapse. Cadian squads execute census operations with portable cogitators, cataloging survivors by age, skill, and collaboration. Status. Former rebels identified through captured network intelligence face immediate penal legion conscription. Their families receive generational surveillance designations. Children enter Scholastica screening. Technical workers undergo loyalty assessment for reconstruction duties. The processing is industrial in scale, administrative in character. Hour 72. Order restoration concludes with ecclesiarchy processions walking behind Medici teams, collecting oaths and ashes in equal measure. Basilisk artillery falls silent. Administratum loudspeakers replace weapons fire. Curfew protocols activate, work details organize, tithe schedules resume. The sound of Port Varkos becomes the scrape of shovels clearing rubble and the rattle of data slates processing compliance forms. The suppression emphasizes routine over heroism, procedure over passion. Imperial forces execute established protocols with industrial efficiency, their coordination flowing through logistics networks rather than battlefield inspiration. Underground networks become targeting intelligence. The Harrow precedent dissolves under superior material resources. Creative accounting transforms from survival strategy into criminal evidence requiring enhanced punishment protocols. Viridia Prime's rebellion ends not with climactic confrontation, but with administrative processing, its population reduced to economic variables in post-conflict optimization calculations. Violence departs as systematically as it arrived, leaving behind permanent Imperial oversight infrastructure and enhanced extraction protocols. How do Imperial forces transition from military suppression to administrative control? What happens to captured rebel leadership and civilian populations? The gunfire fades into paperwork. Within 18 hours of resistance collapse, Viridia Prime transforms from battlefield into processing center, violence yielding to administrative machinery with mechanical precision. Portable administratum complexes deploy across population centers, their prefabricated walls bearing the aquila, and queues already forming in geometric patterns. The transition follows established protocols. Military suppression concludes when bureaucratic processing begins. Processing commences with loyalty oath administration conducted through industrial-scale ceremony. Survivors advance by family unit to loyalty stations, where officio prefectus clerks supervise recitation beneath hololithic aquilae. Biometric scanners record vocal stress patterns and physiological responses. Those registering above deception thresholds face enhanced interrogation. Census cogitators compare names against seized rebel manifests, assigning color-coded glyphs: green for reconstruction labor, amber for interrogation pending, red for penal transport. Children receive blue for scholastic screening, white for servitor candidacy. The system calls this mercy. Asset recovery procedures transform military victory into economic opportunity through comprehensive cataloging. Departamento surveyors inventory salvaged munitions, intact warehousing, and harvestable metals, while administratum lease officers restore tithe obligations augmented by compliance debt surcharges. Each functioning tractor, each crate of grain flows into spreadsheets defining post-event productivity trajectories. Rebellion converts to ledger entries, human cost abstracted as amortization schedules. The Mechanicus moves like a second army. Tech priests pace through power stations and grain elevators, chanting Binharik as they calculate repair sequences. 47 days for elevator restoration, 17 for mining equipment, 63 for transport networks. Sacred schematics blossom on parchment as they declare 91% industrial capacity recoverable if flesh supplies necessary hours. Aptitude assessments identify candidates for technical training, mechanical augmentation, or servitor conversion. Ecclesiarchy. Spiritual rehabilitation programs address trauma through systematic indoctrination rather than therapeutic intervention. Mandatory prayer sessions, confession requirements, and loyalty catechisms replace psychological treatment, treating emotional damage as spiritual corruption requiring doctrinal correction. Penitent masses recite contrition rites. Completion certificates grant access to supplemental rations. Generational compliance monitoring establishes permanent surveillance infrastructure through simple tracking bracelets. Children of indexed families receive tags keyed to school attendance, catechism completion, and labor assignments. Household ration tiers become contingent on family oath scores. Relatives' infractions debit children's futures. Central cogitators compile life paths before they are lived. Productivity. Enhancement protocols. Optimize survivor populations for maximum economic output through systematic life management. Work schedules, housing assignments, dietary allocations become subject to imperial oversight, designed to maximize throughput while minimizing resistance potential. Extended shift rotations, incentive rations pegged to quota overperformance, sanctions for inefficiency disguised as morale measures, transform human beings into economic variables requiring technical optimization. Imperial mercy functions through preservation rather than compassion. Survivors represent valuable economic assets requiring maintenance. Processing queues reduce trauma to administrative categories, while institutional violence normalizes through bureaucratic routine. Pain recodes as inefficiency. Administrators prescribe solutions through more sermons, more guards, fewer hours of darkness. The machine satisfies when lines move. Trauma becomes throughput problems requiring technical solutions. What are productivity enhancement protocols, and how do they ensure long-term compliance? How does generational compliance monitoring affect families of former rebels? The ledgers reveal Imperial Retribution's true architecture. Systematic resource extraction disguised as punishment. Rebellion transformed into renewable profit through administrative alchemy. Compliance debt calculations appear in departamento archives with actuarial precision, converting Viridia Prime's political failure into economic opportunity through mechanisms that make suppression more profitable than prevention. Form. Theta. Redempt/12 itemizes the transformation. Human suffering becomes quantified imperial wealth. Compliance debt assessment begins with suppression. cost itemization calculated to the throne geld. The 47th Cadian's deployment generates $847 million in operational expenses. Orbital bombardment consumes $203 million in ordnance. Processing operations require $94 million in facilities and personnel. Total suppression cost, $1.67 billion. Throne gelds, excluding compound interest at imperial standard rates. This debt becomes the baseline for enhanced extraction schedules extending across generations through systematically amplified tithes, labor conscription, and resource seizure. Repayment mechanisms convert every aspect of Viridia's capacity into imperial revenue streams. Agricultural tithes increase by 37% above pre-rebellion quotas, enforced through Mechanicus crop yield augurs and permanent Arbeits oversight. Mining operations expand to include previously protected watersheds and residential districts. Mineral rights transferred under emergency requisition protocols. Labor conscription rises to 15% of working-age population annually, feeding penal legions whose attrition rates factor into long-term military planning. Each enhancement bears administrative justification while serving systematic extraction. The mathematics demonstrate rebellion's profitability. Enhanced agricultural quotas generate 340 million throne gelds annually. Expanded mining yields 890 million in rare earth extraction. Penal legion recruitment provides 156 million in military labor value. Mechanicus salvage operations recover 445 million in processed materials. Annual extraction totals 1.83 billion throne gelds against suppression costs of 1.67 billion, a 16% return on imperial investment, compounding annually through perpetual enhanced obligations. Multiple imperial institutions claim systematic beneficiaries from Viridia's punishment. The Mechanicus receives Sigma priority salvage rights over damaged infrastructure, stripping components for redistribution across the sector. The Munitorum posts improved provisioning solvency as Viridia's grain flows to regiments that never saw the planet. Battle fleet accounts close positive. Fuel debits recovered through enhanced extraction schedules. The Ecclesiarchy receives expanded shrine wealth through mandatory penitence donations. Each institution transforms suppression into departmental profit. Compliance debt obligations create permanent economic relationships extending beyond Viridia Prime through sector-wide collective responsibility mechanisms. Neighboring worlds receive memoranda outlining surcharge schedules triggered by civil variance, creating economic incentives for interplanetary surveillance and loyalty enforcement. Enhanced extraction from suppressed worlds subsidizes imperial expansion elsewhere. Rebellion-derived resources funding new regiments, fleet construction, and bureaucratic growth. The system operates through controlled crisis generation, creating rebellions that justify enhanced extraction while generating resources for systematic imperial capacity expansion. Administrative records document punishment's transformation into systematic profit through clinical precision that abstracts human cost into throughput optimization. Population reduction enables agricultural mechanization. Destroyed residential districts become mining sites. Former inhabitants relocate to industrial barracks optimized for productivity rather than comfort. Every aspect of suppression aftermath serves dual purposes: punishment and profit maximization, making rebellion literally expensive for entire sectors while enriching the system it sought to defy. The reframing completes imperial governance's fundamental architecture. Viridia Prime's uprising transforms from political failure into economic success, its population's suffering converted to imperial wealth through mechanisms that make resistance economically counterproductive, while generating resources for perpetual suppression capacity. How do enhanced compliance debt obligations affect the likelihood of future rebellions? What long-term economic relationships develop between suppressed worlds and imperial institutions? 5 years after suppression, Viridia Prime operates under what survivors call the new weather. permanent imperial oversight that permeates daily existence with algorithmic precision. The Arbit's precinct fortress in Port Varkos has tripled in footprint, its auspex masts taller than grain elevators, patrols moving by cogitator-generated schedules derived from incident probability matrices. Smaller precinct houses punctuate harvest districts, their Vox arrays relaying compliance data to central surveillance hubs that track every movement through biometric checkpoints disguised as shrine entrances. The Officio Prefectus has integrated seamlessly with planetary governance. Political officers countersign marriage applications, assign housing tiers, and approve transport permits through bureaucratic mechanisms that transform routine administration into systematic control. Memorial compliance monuments dominate civic spaces with calculated psychological architecture. The Port Varkos obelisk, forged from melted rebel barricades, rises where Enforcer Valdic died, its black granite inscribed with approved casualty figures and tithe restoration schedules. Weekly loyalty ceremonies require attendance by designated families, particularly those bearing generational compliance monitoring tags, hidden sensorium bundles. Within monument plinths, record vocal stress patterns during oath recitation. Deviations trigger ration adjustments and enhanced supervision protocols. The monuments function simultaneously as remembrance and deterrent, their presence normalizing surveillance while institutionalizing collective shame. Generational compliance. Monitoring reveals its systematic architecture through life path management spanning decades. Sarah Castellan, now 12, attends Scholastica Redemptiva, where arithmetic lessons incorporate tithe calculations and geography, focuses on supply corridor efficiency. Her identification bracelet, upgraded from simple tracking to biometric monitoring, restricts access to technical education while channeling her toward approved labor categories. Agricultural work, basic manufacturing, supervised service positions. Career licenses arrive pre-edited. Advanced education requires loyalty certification from 5 imperial offices, plus family background verification, extending 3 generations. Psychological adaptation proceeds through institutional routine that transforms exceptional measures into environmental constants. Former PDF Sergeant Jorik Thane operates construction equipment on imperial fortification projects, his military experience valuable for defensive planning while his rebel history ensures permanent supervision. Daily loyalty oaths become as routine as shift schedules. Surveillance presence normalizes into background awareness like weather patterns or seasonal cycles. Resistance requires energy populations no longer possess after years of systematic exhaustion. Terror normalizes through bureaucratic persistence rather than dramatic conversion. Children born post-suppression know no alternative system, reciting imperial catechisms learned before walking, attending mandatory ceremonies as naturally as harvest festivals. Father Matthias, now Ecclesiarchy Station Monitor, files spirit salvage reports while processing confessions that document hunger rather than heresy. The cultural transformation operates through incremental accommodation. Local festivals acquire loyalty themes, traditional songs gain imperial verses, family structures adapt to surveillance requirements and career restrictions. The generational progression succeeds through institutional architecture rather than ideological conversion. Each cohort adapts to restrictions their predecessors found intolerable. Rebellion's memory recoding as administrative correction requiring ongoing management. The grandchildren of those who fought imperial enforcers will know surveillance as natural law, their aspirations confined to parameters defined by permanent oversight protocols. How do memorial compliance monuments function as both remembrance and deterrent? What psychological mechanisms allow populations to adapt to permanent surveillance? 5 years after suppression, Viridia Prime operates under what survivors call the new weather, permanent imperial oversight that permeates daily existence with algorithmic precision. The Arbeits Precinct Fortress in Port Varkos has tripled in footprint. Its auspex masts taller than grain elevators, patrols moving by. Cogitator-generated schedules derived from incident probability matrices. Smaller precinct houses punctuate harvest districts, their Vox arrays relaying compliance data to central surveillance hubs that track every movement through biometric checkpoints disguised as shrine entrances. The Officio Prefectus has integrated seamlessly with planetary governance. Political officers countersign marriage applications, assign housing tiers, and approve transport permits through bureaucratic mechanisms that transform routine administration into systematic control. Memorial compliance monuments dominate civic spaces with calculated psychological architecture. The Port Varkos obelisk, forged from melted rebel barricades, rises where Enforcer Valdek died, its black granite inscribed with approved casualty figures and tithe restoration schedules. Weekly loyalty ceremonies require attendance by designated families, particularly those bearing generational compliance monitoring tags. Hidden sensorium bundles within monument plinths record vocal stress patterns during oath recitation. Deviations trigger ration adjustments and enhanced supervision protocols. The monuments function simultaneously as remembrance and deterrent, their presence normalizing surveillance while institutionalizing collective shame. Generational compliance monitoring reveals its systematic architecture through life path management spanning decades. Sarah Castellan, now 12, attends Scholastica Redemptiva, where arithmetic lessons incorporate tithe calculations and geography, focuses on supply corridor efficiency. Her identification bracelet, upgraded from simple tracking to biometric monitoring, restricts access to technical education while channeling her toward approved labor categories: agricultural work, basic manufacturing, supervised service positions. Career licenses arrive pre-edited. Advanced education requires loyalty certification from 5 imperial offices, plus family background verification, extending 3 generations. Psychological adaptation proceeds through institutional routine that transforms exceptional measures into environmental constants. Former PDF Sergeant Jorik Thane operates construction equipment on imperial fortification projects. His military experience valuable for defensive planning, while his rebel history ensures permanent supervision. Daily loyalty oaths become as routine as shift schedules. Surveillance presence normalizes into background awareness like weather patterns or seasonal cycles. Resistance requires energy populations no longer possess after years of systematic exhaustion. Terror normalizes through bureaucratic persistence rather than dramatic conversion. Children born post-suppression know no alternative system, reciting imperial catechisms learned before walking, attending mandatory ceremonies as naturally as harvest festivals. Father Matthias, now Ecclesiarchy Station Monitor, files spirit salvage reports while processing confessions that document hunger rather than heresy. The cultural transformation operates through incremental accommodation. Local festivals acquire loyalty themes. Traditional songs gain imperial verses. Family structures adapt to surveillance requirements and career restrictions. The generational progression succeeds through institutional architecture rather than ideological conversion. Each cohort adapts to restrictions their predecessors found intolerable. Rebellion's memory recoding as administrative correction requiring ongoing management. The grandchildren of those who fought imperial enforcers will know surveillance as natural law, their aspirations confined to parameters defined by permanent oversight protocols. How do memorial compliance monuments function as both remembrance and deterrent? What psychological mechanisms allow populations to adapt to permanent surveillance? Viridia Prime's suppression radiates across the sector through calculated information warfare, its lesson transmitted via astropathic channels that reach every governor, guild consortium, and Arbeits prefect within 47 neighboring systems. Compliance Report, Sigma. 7741 arrives with clinical precision, its sanitized language describing rebellion's consequences as necessary mercy. Decisive intervention prevented heretical contagion, preserving sector stability through proportional response. Attached holocasts display infrastructure damage assessments, population retention statistics, and enhanced productivity metrics that frame systematic violence as administrative correction. Mandatory sector assembly convenes aboard the permanently stationed battleship Inexorable Judgment, its presence a constant reminder of imperial resolve. Planetary representatives attend by command rather than invitation. Transport costs deducted from planetary budgets as administrative fees. Hololithic presentations showcase Viridia's transformation through approved metrics. Agricultural output increased 37%. Mining yields up 91%. Population compliance sustained at 96%. The data abstracts suffering into success indicators, suppression into salvation statistics. Collective responsibility protocols transform local rebellion into sector-wide economic burden through systematic taxation redistribution. Neighboring worlds absorb stability maintenance surcharges calculated by proximity to rebellion epicenter. Xerion Prime receives 12% tithe enhancement. Kalos Tertius faces 18%. Mordian Beta endures 23% increases. These surcharges fund permanent imperial oversight infrastructure while creating economic incentives for interplanetary loyalty. Enforcement. Rebellion becomes expensive for entire regions, not just rebellious worlds. Enhanced surveillance extends beyond suppressed worlds through preventive compliance monitoring, justified as protection against heretical contamination. Neighboring systems receive expanded Arbites presence, additional ecclesiarchy stations, and officio prefectus integration that incrementally reduces planetary autonomy. Transport permits require imperial countersignature. Communications monitoring intensifies. Loyalty assessments become routine environmental factors rather than exceptional measures. Economic incentive structures reward competitive surveillance between worlds. Systems reporting suspicious activity in neighboring territories receive tithe reduction considerations. Those providing intelligence on potential descent access, improved trade routes, and resource allocations. Merchant captains learn new arithmetic as freight manifests. Add rebellion surcharge. Line items payable at customs nodes after recorded incidents within 3 translation jumps. The system creates enlightened self-interest in mutual observation. Terror functions as governance tool through systematic demonstration that imperial mercy means preservation through submission. Viridia's fate becomes sector scripture, broadcast through mandatory viewing during imperial feast days, rebellion's consequences integrated into religious observance. The deterrent value exceeds military necessity because fear travels faster than fleets, costs less than suppression, and persists longer than occupation. Smaller agitations dissolve at rumors of Cadian transports. Union petitions evaporate when presented with non-compliance price lists detailing children reallocated to Scholastica Redemptiva and land reorganized under asset recovery protocols. Behind the compliance reports and enhanced metrics, grief persists quietly in hab blocks and harvest queues. But the machinery requires only mathematical submission, not emotional conversion. How do collective responsibility protocols create economic incentives for interplanetary loyalty enforcement? What role do neighboring worlds play in monitoring and reporting potential dissent? Control after suppression is not a garrison, but a schedule, an endless administrative cycle that metabolizes time itself into imperial compliance. 7 years after Rebellion's end, Viridia Prime operates within bureaucratic machinery designed for perpetual motion, its future dictated by assessments that never yield passing grades, only postponement of penalty. Assessment Form. Gamma Prime 7741 returns to Scribe Adept Matthias Corin's desk with clockwork regularity. its entries now documenting enhanced extraction rather than shortfall, population optimized to 2.8 billion. Agricultural tithe sustained at 1.16 billion tons annually, mining output generating 890 million thronegelts in rare earth extraction. The red ink has been replaced by green, but the ledgers remain. Eternal. The administrative cycle operates through layered temporal compression that ensures worlds never finish being measured, never finish being afraid. Quarterly compliance assessments grade output against escalated quotas. Monthly loyalty evaluations measure oath fidelity through voice print drift and biometric stress analysis. Weekly productivity audits compare shift rosters to auger-logged machine hours. Daily behavioral monitoring translates movement patterns, social gatherings, and speech cadences into algorithmic risk scores. Each audit opens findings that mandate new audits, creating mathematical perpetuity through bureaucratic architecture. Productivity. Enhancement protocols reveal their systematic purpose as extraction maximization disguised under doctrinal efficiency measures. Shift algorithms lengthen by fractional increments that evade formal complaint thresholds while maximizing caloric expenditure against nutritional input. Housing assignments concentrate surveillance priority populations in monitored districts where HAB-light cycles compress sleep into standardized intervals synchronized with rail timetables and industrial quotas. Medicaid clinics issue stimulants under fatigue mitigation permits, while accidents reclassify as temporary efficiency variances, the language-cleaning administrative blades that cut deeper than physical ones. Memorial compliance monuments complete their transformation from civic architecture into sanctified sensor arrays. The Port Varkos obelisk conceals auspex cones that harvest vocal harmonics during oath recitations, triangulating descent by timbre deviation and physiological stress responses. Pilgrims' footfall patterns become attendance metrics. Incense masks, pheromone analyzers. Votive plaques embed machine spirits that record touch heat and hesitation duration. The monuments harvest reverence and convert it into scoring matrices that feed precinct cogitators, where officio perfectus analysts translate worship into surveillance data. Loyalty ceremonies function as orderly information harvests disguised as spiritual observance. Parish registrars seat families by risk tier derived from generational compliance monitoring. Catechism prompts include embedded call response tags keyed to deception thresholds. Oath phrases undergo subtle alteration each cycle to expose rehearsed lies versus genuine submission. Tokens distributed at dismissal bear purity seals in form but identity keys in function, stamped with rune ink that bleeds compliance metrics when scanned at transit arches throughout the following week. The system achieves immortality through self-perpetuating oversight that punishes minor administrative failures before they accumulate into systematic resistance. A missed loyalty ceremony triggers ration tier reduction. Delayed tithe reports generate work assignment penalties. Unfiled transport permits result in housing relocations to higher surveillance districts. Each infraction compounds across generations through documentation that multiplies oversight rather than reducing it. Appeals exist to create paperwork, not relief. The machinery transforms every deviation into justification for deeper intervention. Imperial control represents permanent institutional transformation rather than temporary occupation. The bureaucratic apparatus installed post-suppression becomes planetary infrastructure encoded into legal frameworks and governance structures that persist indefinitely. Buildings grow around checkpoints. Songs acquire loyalty verses. Childhood adapts to identity bracelets that never come off. A portion of Viridia's sons and daughters now staff these offices, their surveillance training exported to suppress future rebellions elsewhere, their world's data-feeding sector stability index calculations as living testimony to systematic conversion. The ledgers reveal rebellion's ultimate transformation. Resistance transmuted into renewable imperial resource through administrative architecture that reproduces itself across generations, ensuring worlds never recover autonomy, never forget subordination, never escape the endless cycle of measurement and extraction that defines their permanent servitude. Is there any mechanism within imperial bureaucracy for rehabilitation or reduced oversight? How do suppressed worlds contribute to the suppression of future rebellions? Ink does not scream, but it records the silence that follows screaming. 7 years after the red mark that initiated Viridia Prime's suppression, Scribe Adept Matthias Koren processes Assessment Form Gamma Prime 7741 for the final time in Administratum Complex Sigma 7. His fingers bear the same permanent stains: black ink, red correction fluid, yellow parchment dust. But the numbers have transformed completely. The ledgers never end, but their contents evolve from crisis to profit through administrative alchemy. Viridia Prime. Population 2.8 billion. Optimized through systematic reduction. Annual grain tithe 1.16 billion tons, sustained above imperial projections. Mining output 890 million throne gelts in rare earth extraction. Expanded operations yielding 91% productivity increase. Variance, positive 23.7% above baseline requirements. His stylus moves across headers now marked Enhanced Yield, Asset Recovery Complete, and Compliance Debt Serviced. The rebellion's aftermath has been converted to renewable imperial wealth through mechanisms refined across centuries. The transformation appears total in bureaucratic terms. Permanent Arbeits presence, 41% expansion, operational indefinitely. Ecclesiarchy monitoring stations, 28% increase, integrated with planetary governance. Officio, Prefectus administrative fusion, seamless, irreversible. Memorial compliance monuments, functional as surveillance nodes processing 12,000 loyalty assessments weekly. Generational compliance monitoring tracking. 847,000 tagged individuals across demographic cohorts. Each metric represents systematic success, human suffering abstracted into institutional profit margins. Koren completes his notation with practiced efficiency. Recommend administrative maintenance protocols. The phrase carries different weight now, not suppression trigger, but confirmation of permanent control. Somewhere data slates update routine oversight schedules. Somewhere Vox channels clear for standard administrative traffic. The machinery operates in maintenance mode, its violence bureaucratized into environmental constant. This administrative sequence has repeated 47 times during Koren's tenure. Viridia Prime joins Kalos Tertius, Mordian Beta, Zerion Secundus, Halvorn, Morn Vale, and dozens of other worlds processed through identical trajectories. Detection, escalation, suppression, extraction, normalization. Suppression has become as routine as taxation, its procedures refined through repetition into institutional muscle memory that requires no conscious malice, only systematic adherence to established protocol. Administrative distance enables participation without psychological cost. Koren processes human suffering abstracted into mathematical variables, rebellion reduced to variance calculations, systematic oppression translated into throughput optimization. The numbers document only extraction efficiency and compliance sustainability, institutional success measured through metrics that cleanse bureaucratic conscience of moral contamination. Koren shelves the completed Viridia assessment among thousands of identical neighbors, then reaches for the next packet. Assessment Form Gamma Prime 7889, Zerion Prime. Population 6.7 billion. Expected annual ore tithe 2.3 billion tons. Third quarter delivery 1.8 billion tons. Variance minus 21.7%. 3 consecutive quarters of minor shortfall. His stylus hovers over the assessment column and he reaches for the red ink. The cycle continues. The machine eats worlds and converts them to columns through endless paperwork, documenting endless extraction. The true horror lies not in imperial cruelty, but in its banality, efficiency, and mathematical inevitability.